So hey, we've got some Zach Lavine trade buzz after everything kind of remaining quiet on the Zach Lavine trade front. Teams reportedly not being interested in him, unwilling to take on his contract, unsure of his ability to impact winning. We've heard it all before, the reasons why teams are hesitant to trade Zach Lavine and his contract. But this morning we received a report from Pistons beat writer James Edwards, which for the record, I can't really speak to his credibility. I've seen his name pop up here and there a few times, and he's been covering the team for a while, but for me personally, if I don't see it reported from Shams or Woj, or at least I don't see it corroborated by one of the Bulls beat writers, most notably Casey Johnson, then I always take it with a grain of salt. But the report indicates that the Bulls and Pistons have discussed a trade centered around Zach Lavine, where the Bulls would like a return of Bojan Bogdanovic, mainly for salary filler, but Bogdanovic is actually still a solid shooter and contributor, and one of Cade Cunningham, Stuart Thompson, Jaden Ivey, or Jalen Duren. You know, what I'll say is this: we always talk about, well, why haven't the Bulls made any trades? Why do they seemingly never make moves? Why does the front office just sit on their hands while the team remains mid? Well, if this report is true, this is why. The Bulls have unrealistic expectations for what they can get in the form of a trade. They way overvalue their players on the trade market. Don't get me wrong, ask for the world. You should try and get the best return possible for your players, but this is over the top. Why would the Pistons ever give up one of these young players mentioned for Zach Lavine and taking on his contract? I get that the Pistons are historically bad this season. They had that embarrassing 28-game losing streak. They've had all but 5 wins this season, and they need a big-ish name to get fans excited about the team. A ready-now player that can get them some wins and get them out of this perpetual state of losing, and just a talent of a player that is older that can help these younger guys on their roster. I get that from the Pistons' perspective, but is Zach Lavine the right play here? Because by taking on his contract, you're really limiting what you can do for the future in terms of signing free agents or making additional moves. The Pistons have a ton of cap space going into next season. With Bogdanovic on a partial guarantee, not even partial guarantee, none of his contract next season is fully guaranteed. Joe Harris is also coming off the books. The only player they have under contract for a while is Isaiah Stewart. I just don't see how getting Zach Lavine makes sense for both the now and for the future. Now, as a Bulls fan, I would gladly take this. You're talking about going from a situation in which you thought there was no trade market for Zach Lavine, and you might be lucky to simply just move his salary off the books based on what was being reported nationally. But if you can get Bogdanovic and one of those players, one of Cade, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, or Stuart Thompson, yeah, you take that all day, every day, especially if Lavine is still wanting to be moved. I doubt that he's going to be happy going to Detroit, but hey, you're under a contract, you have to go to where you're traded. But again, come on now, the Pistons are not going to give up that kind of package for Zach Lavine. And so if this report is true, it explains a lot why the Bulls have more or less done nothing since 2021 on the trade front. We've heard AK in some of the press conferences after trade deadlines talking about how, trades were available and discussed, and while they would have made trades, but at what cost if the trade wasn't worth it. Like, they clearly want the world in trade discussions, and that just isn't realistic as a front office. They need to lower their asking price. They need to lower their trade expectations. You're in a situation where your team hasn't made much progress over the last 2+ years. You haven't made any trades because teams are thinking you're crazy in your trade demands. And like I said, I like the fact that they're aggressive in their initial ask in a trade negotiation, but you eventually have to start coming down to ensure a deal gets done. Otherwise, you're not going to go anywhere. You're never going to make progress if you have such little self-awareness and understanding the landscape of the NBA trade market. Now, I will say Jaden Ivey is probably the most realistic of those young players if they're seeking one of them along with Bogdanovic, just given Ivey is kind of having a down year. He's been in and out of the starting lineup this season. He's seen a reduced role compared to his rookie season, and there has been talk about the Pistons and Ivey not in alignment with his role on that team. So that is the only player I could see them coming to an agreement on. But even then, I just don't see how this benefits the Pistons long term. Taking on a bigger contract for a player who doesn't fit their timeline, and while you could argue, well, they're getting off of Bogdanovic's contract, who is the oldest player on their team and certainly doesn't fit their timeline, he's effectively on an expiring deal, with his contract not being guaranteed next season. They can get him off the books next year if they really want to. And on top of that, at the beginning of the season, there was talk of the Pistons trying to get a first-round pick in return for Bogdanovic, because Bogdan is one of the better outside shooters in the league that could be extremely valuable to a contending team that needs a sharpshooter and added scoring. So I don't view trading Bogdanovic as a throwaway for the Pistons or a salary incentive move when they're trying to extract value from him in the form of draft capital. And then Cade Cunningham, I mean, there's no way the Pistons are giving up on Cade. Say what you will about Cade, for being a #1 pick and an expected generational talent who has had his issues with injuries, but Cade is a player you can build a franchise around. That's not going to happen. Jalen Duren, Asur Thompson, 2 players that have a lot of upside potential. There's no way the Pistons would ever move on from either of those guys for Zach Lavine. I would be ecstatic if the Bulls got one of these players in a deal for Lavine, but this is a fantasy world right here. In a way, I almost hope this report isn't true because it would seriously make me question the competence level of this front office and the faith I have in them to build a contender, which has already been waning as it is. But thinking they could get something like this for Zach Lavine would set it over the edge for me. Anyway, we'll see if these discussions gain any traction in the coming days. Don't forget the Bulls are taking on the Lakers in a late game tonight. I'll have the post-game video out either later tonight or tomorrow morning. Be on the lookout for that. In the meantime, as always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.